Welcome to Duck Stash, the University of Oregon show on Dash Sports. I'm Izzy LaRue. Here's Michael Strite. Michael, let's get into everything Ducks football. So, Oklahoma State, they had their first loss of the season yesterday against Texas. Tell me, what does that loss mean for the Ducks?
Welcome to November, Izzy. I saw you on Friday. We are back just a couple of days later, and that's because this is our final show before the season starts. I'm going to be doing a crossover show, doing a preview of the game right before the game day. But this is our last chance to talk about Oregon football. I mean, we've been talking so much about previews and position groups and stuff, and now it is here. We got our last thoughts in there, and a lot happening. We get to see a lot of what's going on in the college football landscape. Oklahoma State was a top 10 team in the Big 12, and they're still a really great team, but they lose to Texas in overtime, so they will not be undefeated this season. There won't be a Big 12 team that is undefeated, which, if someone was, that would be sort of an easy berth to the college football playoff. And I think for the Ducks, it means the door is open. How likely the Ducks are to actually, or anyone in the Pac-12 to actually run the table and take that opportunity, I'm not sure. I think more more so than for the sake of the Pac-12, this is a big deal for the SEC and a little bit the Big Ten having a higher chance of being able to squeeze in a second team, because that's always what the SEC and Big Ten are looking at. Is those conferences are so powerful that their best team is going to get there, and there's always a conversation about whether their second best team can slide in the four spot.
Yeah, and the Big 12 really Oklahoma really their lines of making it into that college football playoffs because Oklahoma they've underperformed greatly this season with their rookie Spencer Rattler. But Chuba looks like he couldn't take them to an undefeated season because Texas. I don't know what Sam Ellinger was on yesterday, but they came back to win that game to steal that win, which it hurts the Big 12 as a conference in whole because now I definitely don't see them making the college football playoffs. And now there's really three teams you're looking at for that fourth spot in the college football playoffs. You have Oregon, who's probably last in line, and then you have Georgia and Notre Dame. And now, if Notre Dame can beat Clemson this Saturday, which could be very viable because Trevor Lawrence he's not playing this game because he still has to be out for a certain amount of time because he contracted the COVID-19 virus, and now you're looking at a Georgia team who might only have one or two losses depending on if they win the SEC championship or not. So this, like you said, it opens the door a lot for Oregon now because now Oregon, let's say they go 7-0, winning the Pac-12 championship. That means the only teams that can beat them for that fourth spot is an undefeated Notre Dame, which who knows if they'll do that because they're playing in the ACC this year and they were going to see Clemson in the ACC championship game. So if they lose that game, that might go against them in Georgia. If they lose the SEC championship game and lose again to Alabama, I mean, the only other team that can get that fourth spot is going to be Oregon. So this is a big one for Oregon, Oklahoma State going down, but we'll see what happens throughout the rest of the season.
Yeah, this was an important win for Oregon's college. I mean, importance that what's happening in the Big 12 is important for Oregon's college football chances. The Big 12 especially is really funny right now. I was looking, I think it was on Reddit somewhere, that the Big 12 it has only 10 schools. Kansas sucks, and the other nine schools are basically trying to find a way to get into a nine-way tie for first place because they're in Pac-12 mode where they're beating up on each other. Which, by the way, I fully expect Pac-12 After Dark and Pac-12 Chaos to come back strong, and I don't expect this to be a normal, peaceful year for the Pac-12 either. I think there's going to be just as much bananas, crazy stuff going on and weird outcomes like we saw last year with that Washington State UCLA game, which is just one of the greatest college football games ever, period. And the stuff that was going on in that Pac 12 After Dark, man, it's not going to disappoint. So, the other thing, too, is this conversation inches around Oregon at 7-0. If ACC, even if they drop a game, I don't see them. I mean, they're, what was I going to say? Clemson, they're still, a powerhouse as long as they take care of business in the ACC and just win. And, I assume they don't lose twice. They're going to be okay. You're going to have your SEC champ. You're going to have your Big Ten champ. And that fourth spot is going to be a really hot competition between who's still the best team in the Big 12, who's the best team in the Pac 12, which would have to be a 7-0 Oregon, and a really strong case from a second Big 10 team and a second SEC team. And at this point, I'm putting my money on two SEC teams over anyone from the Pac 12 being good enough. That's where I would say the most likely, fourth playoff team comes out of if everything shakes out the way it's supposed to. And Oregon can give themselves a chance by going 7-0, but you can't understate how difficult it is for this Oregon football team to go 7-0. I mean, they did. I think they did string together 7 straight wins. Yeah, they did put together 7 straight wins last year. So it's not as difficult as kind of going undefeated over an entire Pac-12 slate, but it's going to be hard. And we talk about this a lot. I don't expect them to do it, and Oregon fans shouldn't expect them to do it, even though it's definitely possible.
Yeah, and you kind of nailed it on the head with a second SEC team probably getting that fourth spot because we know the college football playoff committee, they love SEC teams, and you'll always, like, more than likely you'll see a second SEC team in there. I mean, maybe a second Big Ten team. You don't really see it that much because usually Oklahoma does good in their conference, but with Oklahoma, because Oklahoma had back-to-back Heisman winners and Baker, and Hurts made his case, but Joe Burrow had something else to say about that. So they've had great quarterbacks for the past three to 4 years, and now they're starting off with a guy who's coming. Like, they have, like, what, 3 transfers, and they're going with the guy who used to play for them his freshman year, and then he went back down to play at a community college level, and now he's back at Georgia starting for them. But I mean, Michael, I'm getting confused between Georgia and Oklahoma right now. I think it's the red for me. But yeah, what I meant to say was that Oklahoma, they went from Kyler Murray to now Spencer Rattler, who's a rookie. This is the first time playing in the college season, so it's going to be adjustment for him. But as you can see, I don't really see any Big 12 team making that much noise this year. Oklahoma State was their best chance, but they dropped one against Texas.
Right. You look at last year, Oklahoma was obviously still great. Baylor was really incredible. They just kind of had a good, sometimes a team like Baylor, you kind of saw with LSU, where it's just kind of like the stars align in terms of their seniors and what they have for a really strong season. But what you're seeing with LSU and Baylor as well is that you have a really healthy senior class, they leave and the program takes a step back. So that happens with Baylor, and the Big 12 has to lean on Oklahoma still being great, and then both Texas and Oklahoma State moving up. And you've seen Texas is still just bananas. Texas is so funny to watch for me because they continually ping pong back and forth between Texas sucks, fire the coach. Texas is back. They're going to be a top 10 school. No, they suck. No, they're back. It's like this. It's a really funny back and forth. You kind of see the same thing happening with Jim Harbaugh at Michigan to a lesser extent. And then it all shakes down to, Oklahoma State, and they're still a really great team. They're still a tough beat, but they're not going to be going undefeated. They lose that overtime game to Texas because Texas is back.
Yeah, Sam Ellinger, it seems like every year, seems like, oh, he's going to be a Heisman, and then he has one bad game. Oh, he's trash. Let's get a new recruit. And then he has another good game. Heisman candidate. So, yeah, you mentioned it, Texas fans, they like to flip-flop a lot. But let's go talk about more about Oregon and talk about the special teams. So, Michael, how much of a role do you think special teams will have this season for this Oregon team?
Yep. In this conversation, comes directly from the role that special teams had in 2019. Special teams needs to always be talked about. It needs to be addressed. And I fought for us to talk about this because I think, we've done so many shows, Izzy. We got to talk about the kicker and punter that Oregon have coming into this year. It's going to mean a lot because it meant a lot last year. So I'm going to give you the background on 2019. 2019, Oregon was one of 12 schools that had a true freshman kicker in FBS football. That was Camden Lewis. He was a really good prospect in high school, made a lot of good kicks in high school, a lot to be, a lot of high expectations for him, but still, he's a true freshman. He had a rough start. And one of the biggest, nightmare, spooky season things you can say about a college football team is, oh, they have a true freshman kicker. And that really came back to bite Oregon. And he really got piled on at the beginning of the year because he was a big role in that loss to Auburn with missed extra points, with I think there was also a missed field goal by him in that game. He struggled early in the season, and it was a very stressful thing for Oregon fans to talk about how they can't trust the kicking game. In the second half of the season, Camden Lewis did figure it out. He still made 95% of his extra points or something. Like people when people think about Camden Lewis as Oregon's kicker, they have a lot more negative of a perception than his stats will tell you. And his stats still aren't great, but they aren't bad either. He ended the season with most of his extra points made. And if you just looked at the second half of the season, he was making a lot of field goals. He was making a lot more consistent kicks. He was a lot more reliable. The only downside was that the longest field goal Oregon made all year last year was a 40-yard field goal. There was no such thing as a field goal in the 45, 46 range, which is the area that NFL kickers are expected to be making field goals, right? They make those pretty consistently. Oregon, their offense had to play around the fact that they weren't capable of making those. So the entire offense all season kind of had to function around the fact that, well, we can trust Camden Lewis to make a kick within 40, but if it's outside of 40 yards, let's try and go for a first down instead, or let's punt the ball instead. And that was definitely not good. But Camden Lewis, for as much people want to talk about the games that he's lost Oregon or the negative impact he had, he was the MVP for me in the victory over Washington State. The guy made, I think, 5 for 5 on extra points. He made the game-winning field goal at the end. He did not miss. He got many, many opportunities to miss, and he was perfect against Washington State, and they would not have won because they won by 2 points if he was not perfect all game. And Camden Lewis deserves credit for that win, and that's why his picture on the Oregon football roster is him being picked up on the shoulders after that victory. He deserves it. And all expectations are that he will be the kicker this year. They do have 2 other kickers on the roster that are both sophomores now. They had a freshman year and a redshirt year, and now they're redshirt sophomores. And maybe we'll see them in action. But I think Camden Lewis deserves to start this year as the kicker, and I think he's going to just continue to improve on where he was at the end of last year and maybe make some 45-yard field goals.
Yeah, when you talk about that Washington State game, I think I speak for every Oregon fan when saying that I was very nervous, and I honestly thought that he was not gonna make that kick. Like I'm gonna be honest, I did not see that going in, but when it went in, oh it was crazy and awesome when that went in because, like I said, no one thought it was gonna go in, and then once it went in, we're like, oh my god, we really won this game. We really beat Washington State. We didn't choke like we usually do. So it was good to see him get that win for Oregon. But yeah, I'm excited to see what he does this season. Like you mentioned, he did struggle early in the season, and I wouldn't be surprised to see that again just because of everything going on with Corona and not practicing as much as they usually would. So I wouldn't be surprised if that happens, if he struggles again. But on the topic of special teams, it's not talked about a lot, and it should be because there's 3 parts of a football game. It's not just offense and defense. You also have special teams. Now, if your special teams is on point the whole game, you can win a football game just based on either good defense and good special teams or good offense and good special teams, because the special teams unit that pins you down within the 10-yard by having good puncher and good gunners
And
actually getting the ball down.
We saw that last year because when you have a really strong special teams unit, you win the close games. And when Oregon's kicking game was faltering, they lost a close game against Auburn. And when their kicking and punting was on point, they won the game against Washington State. I mean, it just is that little boost that matters a lot when the game comes right down to the wire.
Yeah, and especially when the kickoff, when teams start with kickoff, you kind of want those guys that are going there, going down the field to set the tone for the game. You want to see a big hit. You want to see something happen on a kickoff. And when you get those big hits by your guys who don't play that much, who might be on like I know that not like probably second or third on the depth chart. It sets a big tone for the team because the defense goes out there like all hyped up, like, okay, let's go, we're ready for this. Like set the tone. Now we gotta set it higher. We gotta make sure that this is the tone for the rest of the game. So special teams, it's a big reason why most of these teams win games. In Oregon, if they want to win these close games, they're gonna have to make sure that their special teams play is way better than it was last season, which it should be, just because
Right.
of, like you mentioned, the kicker. He's
And
gonna be a sophomore now.
I wanna go back and just highlight that Washington State game. Camden Lewis. I want to make sure I get my facts right. He did miss an extra point in that game. He was actually 2 for 3 on extra points, but he made a 40-yard field goal at the beginning of the game, his longest field goal of the year. He then, in the fourth quarter, when they needed him, made a 30-yard field goal with 6 minutes left, and then made a 26-yard field goal to win the game, which is so funny because Izzy, you started to hint towards it, but when Oregon had to drive down the field with a minute left. They literally just had a minute left. I was sitting there laughing to myself because I was like, oh my gosh, it's going to be Camden Lewis for the win, right? And if Camden Lewis didn't miss that extra point to begin with, this would be different as well. But yeah, I was just like, we're gonna have to watch Camden Lewis try to make a field goal for the win. And then it was a 26-yard field goal, which is basically an extra point. I'm not joking, is an extra point kick. And Oregon fans did not expect him to make it. Oregon fans just flat out something about everything going on with Oregon this season. Oregon fans were not expecting him to make this chip shot. They were like, "Oh gosh, he's going to miss," and then he made it. And the season changes for Oregon, and the way we look at Camden Lewis changes a little bit. And the last thing I want to touch on with Oregon special teams is we do need to talk about the punter. Last year, Oregon benefited from a really, really talented punter in Blake Maimone. Blake Maimone was a senior out of Southern California. He was a high school quarterback, actually, but he went to one of the most prolific high schools in California. So he found himself losing the quarterback competition to some really talented guys and said, I still want to play D1 college football. So you know what he did? He just became the team's punter. He was like, screw it. I'm changing from quarterback to punter. He ends up being a great punter at that high school, ends up getting signed to Oregon, and he was at least the second or third best punter in the Pac-12 last year. The punting game for Oregon was above average, and it was something that they leaned on as a strength. He's gone. He graduated, and Oregon, weirdly enough, is probably going to move back to Tom Snee. Tom Snee utilized a red shirt last year, but he was Oregon's punter as in his freshman year. So in 2018, in Mario Cristobal's first season, they had Tom Snee as their punter out of Australia. I expect him to make a return as the team's punter. He has experience. He has not been great, so that's something to keep an eye on as well. Is the loss of Blake Maimone for Oregon, and he's just another position that they need to fill the gap with a new player, and we'll see if Tom Snee can live up to that and at least be sort of an average punter in comparison to the rest of the conference.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what this special teams unit does as a whole in the season, just because, like we've been talking about, if the Oregon special teams units, if they're on point, then it's going to be a big help to the offense and defense, whether they're pinning the opponent's offense in the 10, or if they're giving the offense extra points, making those field goals or getting those stops. So I'm excited to see that, and we'll see that this Saturday against Stanford. And that brings us to our next topic. How will Oregon do in their first game of the season, Michael?
Ooh, the big question. We've gotten to game one. Izzy, I do want to point out, correct me if I'm wrong, we don't know who the quarterback is, right? I mean, we're assuming Tyler Shuck at this point.
Yeah,
Tyler
we
Shuck
don't know who the
continues to
quarterback
get
is.
Tyler Shuck continues to get first team reps. I mean, if there definitely could be an announcement for Tyler Shuck as the starter at some point in this week if he just continues to get first team reps. So we expect Tyler Shuck to be running out there for the first play of the game, but there is no official announcement yet. Um, and here it comes, November 7th against Stanford. Um, how will Oregon do in their first game of the season? This is where my skepticism about that slow start comes in. If they're gonna have a slow start with the new quarterback and the brand new offensive line, which we've talked about. It's going to be, most obvious in the first half of the first game. But I don't think Stanford is strong enough. I don't think Stanford has enough going on for them this year to pull off the upset. I think Oregon might stutter, they might falter, and this might be a really close game. If you want to talk about like a spread potential for Oregon against Stanford, I think this game's going to be a lot closer. But I also think that Oregon is going to figure it out against Stanford. I don't think Stanford is, like I said, they got lucky with who they're playing in the first 3 weeks of the season for sure.
Yeah, I'm just really excited about football. I mean, it's been so long. We're in November already, and we haven't seen a single game yet. I mean, we've been seeing all these NFL teams play, all these other college teams play, and now it's finally the Pac-12's turn to start their season. So it's just a really exciting time. And to start against Stanford, I think this is probably the best case scenario for Oregon because this Stanford team, they just lost their starting quarterback last season, KJ Costello, to a Mike Leach who was going to the SEC at Mississippi State, and they only got one good one over LSU. And we all know what LSU is now without Joe Burrow and all those starters. They're not even ranked right now, and neither is Mississippi State. They put up a donut against Alabama, getting 40-pieced yesterday. So that tells you what they're at. But Stanford, I don't know what to say about Stanford. They haven't really gotten the recruits like they usually do in past years. There are noise in the headlines about what their team's doing in the offseason. So this is going to be a test to see how Oregon's going to do for the rest of the season. If Oregon's going to come out and just blast this team out of the water, or if they're going to keep it close and kind of play down to Stanford's level.
Yeah, so Stanford last year, it was their first losing season in a long time. It's the wheels started to fall off. They went 4-8. It was an uncharacteristically bad Stanford team. I mean, even though Stanford hasn't been, a top team, they've been at least top half of the conference. And this was the first year in a while that Stanford was bad. Like they just weren't good. And that made David Shaw, as the head coach there, his seat was a little warm. And I'm David Shaw is one of the longest tenured coaches in the NCAA period. He's up there now. He's been there for I think about 10 years. David Shaw, it's I almost feel bad for saying he's on the hot seat because it's not really a hot seat. Like Stanford, they love him there and they expect him to turn things around. But it's been a slow decline for Stanford's football team and for their football program overall. And they need this is the school that, in the last 10 years has had your Christian McCaffreys and it's had your Andrew Lucks, et cetera. And right now, it's just kind of a team that is middle of the road. I mean, let's say their projection is probably to go 4-3 or 3-4 in those 7 games. So we don't have a lot to talk about in terms of what Stanford is going to be good at this year or what they're not going to be so strong at because they're so middle of the road and because they also had a lot of turnover with the roster this year. We're going to see a semi-new quarterback. We're going to see a lot of transfers coming in on the defensive side. One area of the game that I'm going to be paying attention to is how dominant does Oregon's defensive line actually look against a Stanford O-line that, again, is not, they should dominate. If Oregon's defensive line is supposedly, this is going to be their year where they're one of the best D lines in the entire country, you better come out and set the tone game one from the start and really make life difficult for Stanford's offense because there's so much of this Oregon team that needs to work it out and slowly work through it and gain experience that the strong part of the team, which we've talked about as the D line, they don't have any room for error. They can't start slow. They can't figure their time out. They need to be dominant. They need to be dominant from game one. And if they are, I think that sets the tone for the entire defense. I think that sets the tempo for Stanford scoring 14 or less points in the entire game. It could be a really tough go for the Stanford offense if the Oregon D line is harassing them all 4 quarters of the game. Because if they do dominate the way that Oregon fans are excited about them potentially doing and just being so, physical up front, then Stanford's not going to be able to score a lot of points, and it gives Oregon a window to sneak away with like a 21-14 kind of win, or even make it 24-10 or something.
Yeah, and I want to talk about the flip side of Oregon's team, the offense. I expect a big game from the running backs as well, especially from CJ Verdell, because this Stanford defense, it's not really one of the toughest Pac-12 defenses there is. So this should be a big game for these running backs, and I want to see how they do with their cohesion. I want to see how this Joe Moorhead offense really runs against a Pac-12 defense instead of against these astute SEC defenses, because we all know what he's been doing in the SEC. But yeah, I'm really excited to see what they do. They should have a really good game. Look out for CJ Verdell having probably a 100-yard plus rushing game, maybe a touchdown or two. But I'm putting a lot of pressure on these running backs because it's going to be on them week one.
Yeah, one thing that we also get to at least talk about, we got to savor it while we can, is the fact that because Oregon hasn't played yet, the Heisman campaign is still strong for a variety of their players, right? After they have like one bad game because of the fact it's such a short season, it's like, oh, okay, forget about them. But hey, CJ Verdell, start your Heisman campaign with a big game.
Come on, Michael. I can't give you that.
Kayvon Thibodeau,
And
Kayvon Thibodeau getting
in his sophomore
nominated from the
season,
defensive
Michael,
side. All I'm saying is
sophomore season.
we're not going to get to
Come
talk
on, I'm
about
talking
this
about
next
Trevor
year.
Lawrence and Justin
We're not
Fields.
going to talk. We're not going to get to talk about this next year or next week. I mean, once Oregon's played a game and like they all had, I mean, I'm not going to say they're going to play average, but next week is going to be forget about it. But we can start. We can have the the introduction for the Heisman campaigns for CJ Verdell, Kayvon Thibodeau. Maybe throw Jalen Red in there. Maybe he'll score like 2 touchdowns a
Jalen
game.
Red. Oh, Michael. A Heisman receiver. What was the man who takes back Michael? But
Yeah.
yeah, these shows we get about this talk to muscle, and those guys they obviously now we're looking at some other guys, and I kind of like the Kayvon and CJ Verdell. The Jalen Red one's very interesting
Yeah,
for
Jalen
Heisman.
but I'm just sick of quarterbacks. All right, like Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields. Every year, it's like who are the best 3 or 4 quarterbacks in college football this year? It's like forget about that. Let's mix it up.
Yeah, it's just like in the league, Michael. The MVP is a quarterback award. We all know what quarterback awards are, but I mean, what are you gonna do? That's culture. But yeah, this is going to be our last show before the season starts. And make sure to catch our columns too at sportspac12.com, where you can find columns from most of the Dashboard shows. Look out for my Ducks column too. And thank you for joining us today. Make sure to follow us at Dashboards TV on Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, and check out our website too at dashboards.tv. And make sure to catch our next show too.
All right.